From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Wednesday, May 29th. I'm Abby Larico. Dr. Suzanne Saueressig inspired countless women to pursue veterinary medicine.
Even though at the beginning of her career, it was almost unheard of for a woman to graduate from veterinary medical school, nowadays the rates of women in veterinary school is between 60 and 80%.
More on Missouri's first practicing female veterinarian coming up on The Gateway. The Illinois House approved a $53 billion state budget early this morning, but passing the revenue package to help pay for it was difficult. The spending plan increases education funding, fully funds next year's state pension payment, and pays for dozens of local district projects, also known as PORC. State Representative John Cabello of Rockford says Republicans didn't get any of those. They were shut out of the process again.
Our taxpayers deserve the same treatment of being able to look at projects. But how are we supposed to give them to you if you don't bring us to the table?
The spending plan now goes to Governor J.B. Pritzker, who says he looks forward to signing it. But it took lawmakers 3 tries and more than 2 hours to pass the revenue package, which includes a tax hike on sports wagering, finally approving it around 4:45 this morning. Senator Josh Hawley says House Speaker Mike Johnson is bringing a bill for radiation exposure compensation to a vote, but it does not include victims in Missouri. The bill extends the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which is set to expire in less than 2 weeks. The legislation provides funding for people harmed by U.S. efforts to build an atomic bomb. In March, the Senate passed a version of the bill that expanded the funding to parts of the St. Louis region. People with certain illnesses could receive compensation. Now, Hawley says the House version leaves Missourians out. Democratic Representative Cori Bush and Republican Representative Ann Wagner both said Tuesday they would vote against a bill without Missouri's inclusion. The funding is set to expire June 10th. Lawyers for 6 people who work at St. Louis-based companies but live outside the city say an appeals court decision could mean remote workers won't have to pay city earnings taxes for the days they work remotely. St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Fenton reports these employees had sued the city, claiming such work wasn't subject to the 1% tax.
City officials argued the workers were subject to the earnings tax because they rendered services in the city, even if they did so remotely. But a 3-judge panel ruled in the city means within the geographic parameters of the city, and the workers should get refunds. Beavis Schock is an attorney for the employees. He says he hopes the city will issue refunds to more people than just those he represented.
The public understands that taxes have to be paid, but the only taxes that have to be paid are taxes that are specifically and lawfully assessed by the legislative and executive branches.
A spokeswoman for St. Louis Mayor Tashara Jones says her proposed 2025 budget took the potential ruling into account and will likely not require changes. I'm Sarah Fenton, St. Louis Public Radio.
Metro Transit is making changes after receiving feedback from disabled customers and advocates at a public forum in April. For over a year now, customers have requested that the transportation group provide more routes for people with disabilities. In response, Metro suggested shifting to next-day-only reservations to reduce phone wait times and decrease trip cancellations. But customers were not happy. Now, beginning July 5th, Metro's Call-A-Ride service will allow booking up to 3 days in advance on trips for disabled customers. Jeanette Oxford is the advocacy manager for the nonprofit disability group Paraquad. She says she's relieved.
They compromised and they kind of met us in the middle by saying 1 to 3 days, and we were so worried about this next day only thing that we considered that a positive thing.
Metro says more improvements will be implemented in the coming months. Seed St. Louis wants immigrant and refugee families to feel at home by offering urban farmland where they can grow foods native to their home countries. People from parts of Africa and Asia say they use the outdoor garden to help them grow community in a new land. St. Louis Public Radio's Andrea Henderson reports.
Zohar Naeem has been growing fruits and vegetables on a community farm in the Botanical Heights neighborhood for 15 years. She's an immigrant from Morocco and learned about farming from her father. Naeem loves to cook with fresh vegetables, but she says it's difficult to find some of her favorites here.
I hardly can find fava beans and artichoke or the stems of the artichoke. Those are rare.
Naeem helps run the international forum for Seed St. St. Louis. She oversees the 39 farmers and their crops. She says the farm helps lift their spirits when they are planting seeds from their homelands. Naeem hopes the refugees and immigrants who use the land will pass down farming techniques to the next generation of immigrant farmers. I'm Andrea Henderson, St. Louis Public Radio.
Dr. Suzanne Saueressig was known for transforming veterinary medicine in the St. Louis region. She helped stabilize a struggling Humane Society of Missouri clinic in the 1950s and 60s, despite resistance from her colleagues in a then heavily male-dominated field. St. Louis Public Radio's Marissanne Lewis-Thompson spoke with Andy Primm, a museum educator at the Missouri History Museum, about Saueressig and how she became the state's first practicing female veterinarian.
Dr. Saueressig grew up in Nuremberg, Germany, and she knew at an early age that she was going to become a veterinarian. But World War II put a pause on that dream. What was that time like for her?
She said as an adult that during her childhood, I never dressed dolls, only dogs and cats. But of course, she was taking nursing classes and with the intention of continuing on to veterinary medical school. But she was drafted into the Army during World War II, and so she was a medic on the German side during the war. And then during the final year of the war, she was actually captured by the Allies and spent that year in a POW camp.
Post-war, she went back to school, but her parents weren't supportive of her becoming a veterinarian because of the stigma associated with the profession. Why was veterinary medicine frowned upon, especially for women?
Working with animals was just seen as kind of unclean back then, maybe for the diseases that animals carried. Maybe it was believed that those would be passed on to people. And I think it was believed also that that was a job that was more fit for men. Maybe it was seen at that time that men were the ones who should get their hands dirty. And of course, there was the stereotype that perhaps women should be doing more domestic work, or if they were working, something like a teacher. So at that time, it was really unheard of for a woman to become a veterinarian.
So she eventually graduated from Munich Veterinary College in 1953 as the only woman in her class. How did she end up in St. Louis?
That's a good question. St. Louis is a long way from Germany. But St. Louis and Missouri have had a long history of German immigrants. Starting in the 1800s, there were several waves of German immigrants that moved to Missouri. And from what I understand, Dr. Saueressig already had some relatives living in the St. Louis area. So she had wanted to travel and learn more about American veterinary medicine. And so because of her connections in the area already, this seemed like a natural fit.
So she's in St. Louis now, and she lands a job at a then understaffed and ill-equipped Humane Society of Missouri. And at the same time, St. Louis was experiencing an overpopulated pet problem. How did she handle that?
It's really true. The pet overpopulation problem at that time was very serious. And Dr. Saueressig once described it as chipping away at an iceberg with a teaspoon. But she was someone who would face things head on. Even though the challenge was huge, she was undaunted by it.
Being the only woman there, did she get support from her colleagues?
Initially, there was a lot of pushback from older male doctors who were discriminating against her, both because of her being a woman, but also because she was an immigrant. These older male doctors at the clinic didn't trust her abilities, but she very quickly proved herself, and a lot of those men who had been in positions of leadership had to make way as she was promoted ahead of them.
So let's get to that. She went on to become the chief of staff for the clinic in 1965 and was later dubbed Woman Veterinarian of the Year. How have her contributions shaped veterinary medicine in St. Louis?
The Humane Society of Missouri clinic became one of the largest clinics in the Midwest. They treat tens of thousands of animals a year. And her legacy is still being felt today. It's still one of the largest clinics in the Midwest. And the standard of care there is really one of the highest that you can find as well. And that's all thanks to her. She made sure that the clinics became clean and hygienic, but she made sure that also that they had sophisticated modern equipment like x-ray machines, for example.
Why is it important for us to remember Dr. Saueressig, not only for her contributions to her field, but also as a pioneering woman?
Even though at the beginning of her career, it was almost unheard of for a woman to graduate from veterinary medical school, nowadays the rates of women in veterinary school is between 60 and 80%, and the majority of practicing veterinarians today are women.
That was Andy Primm, a museum educator at the Missouri History Museum, speaking with St. Louis Public Radio's Marissanne Lewis-Thompson about the legacy of Dr. Suzanne Saueressig. Our Jonathan All edited that piece. The Gateway is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, a listener-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis. Music by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Abby Larico, and from the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom, this has been The Gateway.